You're listening to Panthers on Tap. I'm Curtis Round, joined by Bryson Carbley. We're just two fans sharing our love for the game and Carolina Panthers football. So join us, crack open a cold one, some bubbly, a little wine, some scotch. We don't care, whatever makes you sleep better at night. Before we dive into the episode, a little self-promotion. Stop what you're doing. Go give us a follow on Twitter at Panthers on Tap. Join the discussion on our Facebook group. We have over 2,500 members. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcast. Just search Panthers on Tap. The 2024 NFL Draft is finally in the books after all that long-awaited offseason. Dan Morgan made a couple trades in this one, a little more than I expected. But Carolina came away with 7 players in the draft. We're going to talk about it this evening. Bryson, how you doing tonight?
Good, man. Yeah, it was an exciting draft. Like you said, kind of an unexpected start, and even up to through the 3rd and 4th rounds, it was a little crazy. But I think we came away with some good players, which we'll get into tonight. And also shout out to my Tar Heels. Your favorite player, RJ Davis, is back, and the Tar Heels will be.
I saw that.
Tar Heels will be causing problems for Duke this upcoming season. So
he's channeling Baycott. He'll just stay there forever and play 7 years and then go to try to go to the NBA.
Yeah,
Duke lost a lot of guys too, man. So we'll see how things shake out. Well, let's get into the draft picks this evening. Well, we got to shout out the Canes too. We were just talking about that before going on the air. Seems like they usually do good that first round. We'll see if they can continue that against the Rangers. But yeah, they've been really fun to watch as of late. So
yeah, absolutely. The team is the best it's ever been. When you talk about the top line with Aho and Jarvis and Gunsel, I mean, if it's any year, it's this year for the Stanley Cup. They got the roster for it. It's just they got to put it together and play consistent hockey. So the goaltending will be the big question. If Freddie can not fall down and let goals go in, that's a big question. But
tripped over his own skates yesterday.
Yeah, that was frustrating. But luckily it didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. You can't be doing that versus the Rangers. The Rangers are a good team. They won the President's Trophy, so best record in the NHL. It's going to be an uphill battle, but I think the Canes can do it.
All right, let's talk about the draft. Bryson, I'll be honest with you. I was not expecting them to trade up at all. If I was a betting man, I would have put my house up on the market on that one. I did not see it coming. Obviously, we know how things kind of landed in this one. But let's talk about it. And, it's Xavier Legette. A lot of people have been pronouncing it wrong. Me, all of us really on this show.
Yeah.
But yeah, he kind of cleared the air during his press conference. But let's talk about him as a player a little bit. Carolina, they make the trade up. Let's talk about the trade up first. What were your thoughts initially when they traded up?
Initially, I think I tweeted like moments after it happened. We know who this is for, right? My guess was that it was for Xavier Legette. Legette, if that's how you say it. Xavier Legette. I think throughout the whole entire draft process, we all understood. We talked about it on the show. They were enamored by him as a prospect, and the love was in the air, to say, for him. So they didn't give up much for the trade up. They pick up the 5th-year option. Hopefully, we get to the point where they are in a position where they have to pick up the 5th-year option. He's that good, and they do need to in that 5th year. So I think it's a little bit of a safety net for them in regards to the ever-growing price of wide receivers in the open market. And they get their guy. Luckily, Brandon Beane. I think there were some reports that came out after that. I think it was the Patriots that were trying to trade up as well, and Bean gave his friend Dan Morgan a call, and it worked it out with Dan for Carolina to trade up. So I think there was speculation that the Patriots were considering trading up for Legette, but that's obviously just speculation at this point. But it was their guy. They identified who they wanted, or pretty early on. It felt like did some extensive work with him. I'm sure multiple meetings. Whether it be a 30 visit or otherwise. And they identified him early on and made their mind up. And, you know, I think like we've talked about before with Liggett, the concerns, of course, are the press man, like I talked about in last week's episode, the game versus Tennessee. He really struggled, but you know, he's an exciting prospect. I mean, that's really all you can say when you talk about the size and the speed that he has. A 4.3 speed. I mean, he is literally DK Metcalf reincarnated. Now, is that what he's going to be on the pro level? Obviously, we don't know. We don't know if he's going to be that kind of player, but he has the build for it. And, you know, I think I tweeted his ceiling is as high as any wide receiver in this draft because of that size and speed. And it's going to be up to the coaches in Carolina to get it out of him. So obviously they identified him early on. He's going to play a major role in this offense, you know, with whether it be jet sweeps, running out of the backfield, you know, playing the X receiver, whatever it is, he's going to be involved a lot. And I think it's truly up to the coaches in Carolina to get the most out of him moving forward.
Yeah, I remember when the trade came in, I think I tweeted jokingly, I Donnie Mitchell with like the eyes emoji because everyone knows I really wanted him. But it was written all over. Everyone down to Bryce Young's father wanted this guy on the Panthers, and that was clearly their guy. At the time, I kind of wish they would have stayed at 33. Who knows if he would have still been there, like with your report. I think that was Mike Reese who ended up reporting that from ESPN, who's, you know, pretty, you know, I trust him. He's a beat reporter for New England, you know, the David Newton for the Patriots, basically. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, that makes sense. They want to go up and get their guy. And obviously they mentioned the 5th round option. So I get it. I know even Bill Belichick, I don't know if you saw Pat McAfee's gig he was doing. Bill Belichick called it before it even happened. He's like, if I'm Carolina here, I think they trade up and go and get their guy, because this was clearly the guy they really liked and who they wanted, you know, to fill in within Dave Canales' offense. So I get the pick. I'm excited. I'm excited to see what he do. His athletic profile is ridiculous. As a lot of the stuff you mentioned, 4.3, 940 is for his size is really impressive. He's stronger than hell. Just looking back on my notes from what we discussed a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about wide receiver prospects, guy's got a massive wingspan. He's explosive with the ball in his hands. I don't know how many times I counted at games that I watched where he took a shallow cross 70 yards of the house, just outright beating guys with his speed. So that's the things you're probably going to see early on from him, are those type of plays. And like you said, I've seen, you know, with my own eyes, some concerns with him getting off of man coverage. We'll see if that improves. I thought he did a little bit better job and kind of showcased that more during the Senior Bowl. So we'll see what they can get out of him. But I think the sky's the limit. I do think, obviously, this guy, he's got some risk to him, just like any player in this draft, really. And when you're, you know, in that back half of the first round, it's sometimes you're throwing a dart at a dartboard, hoping, you know, these guys really hit their ceilings, and we all hope he's gonna. So I have high hopes for him. I think he's in good hands with Dave Canales and this coaching staff, and we'll see where it takes him. And like you said, I do think, you know, he could become a DK Metcalf, but I don't want to get and jump to those conclusions yet, because I know kind of, you know, we were saying that about Jonathan Mingo last year, and look how that panned out. So you got to kind of temper those, and I know you're not doing that. I'm just, for folks out there, I just think sometimes we get too caught up in the hype and the hope early on because we're just, you know, we're just excited because these are new guys. But temper expectations. He's got one hell of a voice. I love listening to talk. Even though it's sometimes hard to understand him, it's great. It's entertaining as all hell. But seems like a really good dude. Is going to grind his ass off. I mean, he was already, videos have been out there. He's already working on, you know, route running and things with, you know, his guys. So I love to see it. And I'm excited to see what he and Bryce Young can build for this offense. And what he can open up to for some of these other wide receivers like Deontay Johnson and Adam Thielen and Jonathan Mingo, because I don't think you can forget about him either. But yeah, overall, I mean, they got their guy. You can't gripe too much about it, and we'll see where things go from here. And hopefully it's for the best. Let's go to the next guy, because Carolina, they want offense. I mean, that was clear these first couple rounds of this draft. And let's move on to Jonathan Brooks. So for most of us all know what happened in this draft. They ended up trading back with the Rams. And honestly, I thought this was going to happen. I remember mentioning in our mock draft that I do think they're going to try like hell to get that second rounder back for 2025 from the Chicago Bears that they traded for Bryce Young. And they did just that. The Rams, they love to send those picks away. They found the perfect team. They obviously were at pick 39. They traded back to 46, got a second rounder for next year, which is great. And Bryson, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. It was, I don't know if weird's the right word, but they were bringing in a lot of the top backs of this draft. And there was clearly a reason for it. They clearly wanted to upgrade in that room, even though some could say it wasn't a big need. But Dave Canales said, he's going to be stubborn with running the ball, and he's going to be. So get ready. He's going to run the shit out of it. And even when you don't want him to run, he's going to run some more. So just get ready for it. But we talked about this guy. This was one guy I mentioned. I love him. I love this pick. And I think this is going to pay dividends down the road. I know he's coming off of an injury, ACL, but it sounds like he's on track. He's already been running. He's starting to do cutting soon, I think, at some point. So I'm all for this pick. Just looking at, some of the things I wrote up, I think he's one of the most elusive backs in this draft, hands down. I put light on his feet. He can juke. He can spin. He's got some good patience. He can catch the ball, which is another benefit. I mean, he's got a lot of facets to his game, and I think he's got great balance, and he's got some power to him too. So I'm really stoked about this pick. I know a lot of folks thought maybe they should go in a different direction. Just looking at the second round, I'm just trying to see. Cooper went a pick before them to Green Bay. That was one that we all talked about, was a guy that we were kind of hoping Carolina would get. Obviously, that didn't happen. Sainristil was still on the board out of Michigan, that corner. That might have been another route they could have went. Zach Frazier was still there. So those are some of the couple of guys that went after that pick. But what were your thoughts on Brooks? Are you excited about him as much as I am?
Yeah. I like Jonathan Brooks a lot. I think going through the process, I had Blake Corum ranked over him. Reviewing that after the draft pick and getting more into the film for Brooks and having a little bias that Brooks is a Carolina Panther now, probably I can see why he was pretty much the consensus number one running back in the draft. I just had liked Blake Corum for a long time, dating back to his Michigan days and what I saw on the field. But Jonathan Brooks, from all accounts, really was the day one or the consensus number one ranked running back in the draft. Like you mentioned, he has the dynamic ability of catching the ball in the backfield as well as running it. He can between the tackles, outside the tackles. Just looking at his overall grade from 2023, 91.5 is pretty damn good. If you pay any respect towards the PFF grades, which I know a lot of people don't, which I totally understand. But it just gives you a little glimpse into at least their grading system and the improvements that he showed from 2022 to 23. He, like you said, he is coming off an ACL injury, on track to be back for training camp. This is a guy who had less than 200 carries when he was at Texas, and he is still really young. I believe he's 20 or 21 years old.
21, I think.
21 years old. So a lot of people are concerned about him possibly losing a step. I don't think that's the case in this situation, coming off injury, solely based off of age and mileage on his legs up to this point in his career. You know, he spent time behind Bijan Robinson, and then before him, who was the other Texas?
I was trying to look it up.
Yeah, the other running back is slipping my mind, but he has spent time
Roschon Johnson.
Yeah, but behind two really good running backs coming out of college. Of course, Bijan was a top 10 pick, but yeah, I mean, this is a guy who showed the ability to be the home run hitter, which we talked about last week. Is what Carolina needs. They're really trying to identify a 3-down back, and I think that's what Jonathan Brooks is. Of course, his blocking can be a little better, but you know, so can Chuba's and Miles. So I think Chuba Hubbard is a good running back. You know, I was a hater of Chuba Hubbard going into last season. Then Chuba Hubbard proved me wrong, and I was happy about that because, of course, he's a player on my favorite team and he played well. So I think Chuba Hubbard is more of a RB2 than an RB1. I think Chuba Hubbard is a good change of pace back, and I think that's how they feel as well, judging by this second round pick, their second pick in the draft, being the number 1 running back in the NFL draft. I think that they are trying to identify or are saying, hey, we think we need an upgrade to this position, or at least someone to play that 3-down role. So I think Brooks is that. I think he is spectacular in all the areas we talked about. I think he's going to be a dynamic piece for this offense moving forward if he stays healthy, you know, growing with Bryce and really taking the pressure off of him and having an effective running game. Like you said, they are going to run the ball. They brought in 2 big guards, drafted a running back. They're going to run the ball and they're going to play action off the run, and they're going to get Bryce on the move. That's what they're going to do, and they're going to be hard-headed about it, and they have a plan at least, and at least it's probably going to be an offense that resembles a offense created in the century. So it's going to be a change for us as Panthers fans to see something that looks competent, I think, but I think that they have a plan. They're going to stick to it. So identifying a running back that they obviously liked, and you know, we all heard the video of Jerry Jones saying that he's the best interview that he's ever had during the draft process in his 30 years of doing it. So obviously the Cowboys were big on him too, and I think there were a lot of other teams as well that had Jonathan Brooks ranked highly, but Carolina jumped out and in front of all of them drafted the first running back off the board because they knew that's who they wanted, and that's what the style of offense that they were going to be running. Again, they identified a guy and made a decision. I was not mad at it at all. It did shock me a little bit, to be honest. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb, so I didn't get any Twitter notifications because I wanted it to be a surprise when they read it off the card.
Yeah, I was cheating.
Yeah. So when they said Jonathan Brooks, I was like, wow, okay. I immediately got on Twitter thereafter, but I was excited about it, man. I think he's going to be the best running back that we've had since, Jonathan Stewart.
Yeah, I'm all for the pick. He evaded 30 tackles this past season, tied for 11th in the country among all players. So just another little tidbit about him there. But yeah, I love the pick. I do think Miles Sanders takes even more of a backseat than he did last year. I don't know if they're going to get rid of him and maybe just wait, and maybe, a team's out there, a running back goes down. That might be a trade value option. But I do think they'll keep Miles Sanders for the time being and kind of see where things shake out, because he is coming still off injury. So you kind of got to guarantee he's going to come back from that fully healthy. So we'll see where this thing goes. But yeah, Carolina, second offensive option for Bryce Young in the draft, back-to-back picks. Let's go to the round 3 pick here. And this one was more of I would say this was the biggest shock to me, was this pick. Not a guy I was too familiar with. And from my understanding, the way, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bryson, they traded up to get him. Was that correct? I'm almost positive they traded up. They got rid of, I want to say, was it both of their fifth rounders? Yeah. They traded both 5th-round picks. They obviously recouped a 5th-rounder later on. But they traded up, I want to say, was it with Indy?
I can't remember.
It might have been Indy or – let me see if I can find that real quick here. I have the board up, so it shouldn't take me too long. No, they traded with the Jets on this one. So they traded up with or this was the trade where they took Corley, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
So Carolina actually, they had the 65th pick. They traded back with the Jets. That's what it was. And then I believe they might not have traded up for this pick then. I believe at 72. I can't remember. But anyway, let's just talk about the player. Trevin Wallace here from Kentucky. I watched his game against Florida before we got on here. I haven't seen a ton on him. I think he's got good pursuit to the running back from what I could tell. Really, a really decent tackler. The biggest thing I saw, and again, I only watched one game, so there needs to be more study on this guy, obviously. But just from what I could gather in that one game, I'm a little concerned about him getting off of lineman blocks when they get to the second level. So when the linemen can get to those linebackers, I saw him a couple times get swallowed up by a couple big linemen, and that would be my biggest concern from him. But I will say, I get it. Dan Morgan obviously played the position at a really high level. I'm sure has a knack for finding good linebackers, and I'm just hoping this guy pans out. There was other guys in that range that I would have preferred. Just looking at the list from here, I mean, they were at Corley. They traded down. They could have stayed at 65 and took Colson, the linebacker out of Michigan. A lot of people liked him and thought he was a better prospect, so they kind of let that one slip. And maybe they weren't as high on him in that position. There was another guy I know that they passed up that a bunch of people, a bunch of people were upset about. And I can't find the guy on here, but this was one where I didn't know much, and I think this was probably the biggest head scratcher of the draft. I think for a lot, even analysts. Again, that's not to say this guy couldn't be good, but this was one pick I'm like, huh? Who? Type thing. So I don't know. What were your thoughts on Wallace?
Yeah, this pick reminds me of Brandon Smith. This pick reminds me of DJ Johnson. This is a pick that they drafted solely based off of his measurables. He has a 9.34 RAS score. He ran a 4.5 140. His RAS score ranked 193 out of 2,889 linebackers from 1987 to 2024. So he has the traits. I think that they're banking on the coaching staff. I mean, really, and maybe Dan Morgan identifying a couple of traits in Trevin Wallace on tape that he feels could make a good linebacker in the NFL. I mean, his stats in college weren't amazing. He did make a couple flash plays here and there. He wasn't playing on a great team at Kentucky, but I think that this is someone that you draft off traits, and it just unfortunately gives me flashbacks to the two players I mentioned, because those guys were drafted off traits, and neither of them have really panned out to this point. I don't think Brandon Smith's on the team anymore, so it was a head scratcher. I agree, and I did like Colson out of Michigan a little bit more, but I think at this point all we can do is trust Dan Morgan and trust Dave Canales that they made the right choice. I think he's going to be a hell of a special teamer with that speed and that size. He's going to be an instant impact on special teams. Now, is that worth a third-round pick? I don't know, but they needed to add to the linebacker room, which they did again in this draft later on that we'll get into. But I think Wallace hopefully can learn behind Shaq Thompson and Josie Jewell and learn the NFL game and become that player that he has the ability to become with that size and speed, which is a very good NFL linebacker. But that's a long shot at this point. So again, I'm in the same boat as you. I didn't know much about him. I didn't really look at much of his tape through the draft process or really even identify him as someone that I liked. But Carolina obviously did, and we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, and just to clarify on some of these trades, because they moved a couple times in the second and third round, so I got confused. So I want to clarify. They moved up to get Jonathan Brooks. They gave up pick 52 and then the 2 5th-rounders. That's where they lost the 2 5th-rounders. They traded back in the 3rd round and picked up Wallace with the Jets pick. So just to clarify that a little bit. But yeah, I know this one's a mystery for me. I don't know how this is going to pan out. I wish they maybe would have went in a different direction here. Corner comes to mind. I believe there was a couple of guys that we mentioned at corner. Obviously, TJ Tampa was still there. He kind of fell. I think his value was a little bit lower from the coaches and the scouts and the GMs over the mock draft boards. But that was a guy I was really looking at and liked. I know he was still out there. So just some other guys thinking off the top of my head. I know in the 3rd round, I was talking to Edgar about this, and we'll discuss this guy in a little bit, but I would have almost went Sanders in the 3rd and then took Bortolini in the 4th, and there you'd have went with tight end. You still would have got the tight end. You still would have got the center, and you'd obviously skipped over Wallace. But again, this is their vision. We'll see how it pans out. But that's kind of just a little bit of background on Trevin Wallace, and we'll kind of see how that pans out. Obviously, I don't think he's going to come out of the gate starting. He's going to probably play. He's going to take a back seat to obviously Shaq Thompson and Josie Jewell, and he'll probably have a pretty big role on special teams right away. But it's good to see that they think there is a need here in the depth, because we all talked about it. We did think there was some need here. I think, Cooper was probably our darling across the board from everyone we've had on this show. But they go with this guy out of Kentucky. So we'll see where things land there. Let's go to the next one. And I just mentioned his name. That's Ja'Tavion Sanders. Bryson, what were your thoughts on the pick? I know you liked another guy who in this position group, but what did you think of Sanders?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ben Sinnott was the clear number 1 tight end in this class. But going into day 4, having the first pick of the opening the opening of day 3, this was the guy I wanted. This was the guy I said they should take Sanders here to start the 4th round, and they did. Sanders immediately becomes the best receiving tight end in that room. I'm a huge Tommy Tremble fan. I think he's still continuing to grow. I think Tremble is a little bit more dynamic when it comes to blocking and receiving than Sanders is. But Sanders is leaps and bounds above what Tremble's at in regards to receiving the ball and just catching in general. Sanders is what a lot of people identified as like an interior deep threat. Doesn't really have that breakaway speed where he's going to take the top off the defense, but he does a good job with contested catches, and he catches the ball when it's thrown his way. We saw a lot of tape released after highlights of him getting hit and catching the ball. Excuse me. Getting hit and catching the ball. A lot of one-handed catches we saw. I think he had a catch on You Got Moss when he was in high school, I believe, where he just had that sick one-handed grab. I think Sanders is a threat that is added to this room, that he becomes tight end 1, I think, pretty early on. I think this coaching staff does like Tommy Tremble a lot, and I do too, but I think Sanders just adds that additional threat of receiving. Maybe, obviously in the 2 tight end sets, they're going to be running Tremble and Sanders, and hopefully we see very little of Ian Thomas. I guess he brings a little bit of upside to blocking, but, we've all seen the tape where Thomas has even struggled blocking. So I think Sanders, again, probably my favorite pick of the draft with the value, considering the value in the 4th round. I thought Sanders was easily a 2nd or 3rd round pick. Slips to the 4th round. You get him there. You fill a huge need in that room, and that tight end room isn't looking so bad going into training camp.
Yeah, I think this was their best value pick based off of the analyst mock drafts, if you want to say that. Yeah, I wasn't shocked at this one. I personally like Troy Franklin at this pick. He went the next pick to Denver. I know they already had a wide receiver. If I was the GM, that probably would have been my pick as Franklin. I think he's going to be a pretty damn good player. And, Denver's gets a gift to go back with his QB at Oregon and Bo Nix. So, but I do like
Troy Franklin.
I do
he can't
like
get away.
No, he can't. But hey, I mean, he seemed pretty stoked about it. Obviously, there's familiarity there, so I'm sure I'm sure he likes that for sure. But yeah, I mean, Sanders is your big, red zone target to go alongside Leggett. And then obviously Deontay Johnson and Adam Thielen. I think, like I said about with Brooks, Sanders takes a back seat there. And I think, like you said, I think Ian Thomas takes a back seat in the tight end room with this. And hopefully he's off the team at some point here. But I think, Sanders, he's a massive target, 6'4", a big dude, can catch. And Carolina finally put some stock into this tight end position. And I think it's going to pay off for Bryce Young to have that safety blanket. I do think you're going to see some 2 tight end sets with Tremble. I don't think, I think Tremble's still going to have a pretty decent role on this team. But I do think this guy is pure pass catch ability for Bryce Young. And I'm all for it because they've really haven't had a tight end since Greg Olsen. And I was pretty fired up last week when we were talking tight ends and how Ian Thomas is still on this roster. And God forbid I ever see a tight end screen to him again. But I'm excited. I mean, we talked about this. This Texas team had so many offensive playmakers. Carolina could have went with the clean sweep and went with Adonai Mitchell. I'll let it rest after this, but they decided not to. But again, they had some players on offense, man. We didn't even talk. I mean, Xavier Worthy too. I mean, letting that guy go to the Chiefs is ridiculous. I'll get off the tangent now on Texas.
Yeah, the most ridiculous part is the Bills trading the Chiefs to allow them to select the fastest wide receiver in NFL history. That's crazy to me, but whatever.
They had their eyes on Keon Coleman. I mean, that was clear as day. But yeah, I mean, it goes back. Texas was stacked on offense when it come to weapons. So, Carolina dips the Texas two-step. I think as Edgar called it in his article on Roaring Riot. Go check it out. There's my shameless plug for Edgar Selmingo, who we had on last week briefly. So, yeah, I mean, again, this is the 3rd offensive player for Bryce Young. It was clear. I know they said they didn't want to, just surround Bryce Young with, weapons. They wanted to surround this team with, really good players. And clearly they wanted guys on offense to help him out. So let's go to the 5th round. And Carolina finally, which I think there's another guy waiting in the wings here that I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. But in the 5th round, they went with cornerback. They finally addressed the position. Not sure if I'm going to say this name right, but Chow, I don't even know. Let's just say Smith Wade, the cornerback from Washington State. Maybe it's Cha. I don't know. But it sounds like this guy played more outside than he did inside in college. And then he said this in his press conference with the media the other day after being drafted, that his first reps in the nickel was at the Senior Bowl. And he showed out at the Senior Bowl. He played really well. He had a pick in that game. It might have been a pick 6. I don't remember, but he made one athletic play. He dove, he was diving, and he caught the ball for an interception. Really nice play. And he really stood out at that nickel spot that entire week. So I think clearly the plan is that this is your Troy Hill, quote unquote, replacement at some point. And, I think he said he'll play both inside and out, but I think Carolina is going to put this guy at the nickel spot eventually. And, he's going to kind of replace Hill in there. And, there's a guy waiting in Gilmore, and I think that is coming at some point here. I would be shocked if it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key, right? I think we had a draft where we kind of essentially had that in the back of our minds when we were drafting in our mock draft. But yeah, this is a guy who comes with a pedigree. Obviously, you see the captain patch there. I think that is really valuable to Dan Morgan. Someone that has that leadership ability, someone that's been a leader on their team for a couple of years. Smith Wade was that. He lacks in speed and in size, but I think what you mentioned, his showing out at the Senior Bowl, I think he was on Troy Franklin on one interception, if I'm not mistaken. Absolutely blanketed him and intercepted it almost in the end zone. And then that other one that you mentioned, the one where he was diving, was just awesome. He's obviously plays with fire, under his pads. He's not afraid to hit. He seeks out contact. I think that this is just someone that brings an attitude to the defense that they're trying to incorporate. A smash mouth, hard hitting defense that's not afraid to get in your grill and let you know that they're there. So I think that that's the kind of player that Smith Wade is. I think he's a couple years away from being a legitimate contributor on this defense, but with Evero calling the shots, I mean, we saw Evero bring in Jameson off a practice squad and had Jameson covering Justin Jefferson pretty damn good in his first game starting. So I think it's a young room overall. A lot is going to depend on the health of J.C. Horn, obviously, but you bring in Gilmore, and then you have depth with Dane Jackson, Smith Wade, Jameson, Boodle, and so forth. I think it's a decent cornerback room, and if it stays healthy, I think it could be a good one.
If Gilmore comes, I would say that would be the caveat for me, because we all want these guys to be healthy all season. Probably not going to happen. That's just reality of the NFL. But yeah, if they get Gilmore, I think this is a pretty decent room. But yeah, just going back to him a little bit more, just from some of the stuff I've been reading online, because again, I haven't watched every single one of these guys play in games, just seen snippets here and there. But from what I'm reading, he does lack some length and size. So that's why you probably wouldn't see him on the outside as much. And actually, this article I was reading earlier, this is from Bleacher Report. You can believe this. It's kind of crazy. His pro comp, can you guess?
Pro comp, Troy Hill.
Troy Pride. Troy Pride
God. Jr. Oh, God.
So take that for what you will. We all remember him. And you know what? I'll tell you what. Troy Pride, I love the dude. The guy was great at training camp. Seriously, was so awesome with the fans on the sidelines after practices. Thought he had some flashes. I was kind of pulling for him when he was here, but that was his comp, and obviously just didn't pan out, and he wasn't that great of a player. So we'll see. We'll see what Smith Wade does, but it sounds like, that nickel spot is going to be his at some point here. So let's move on to the 6th round. And Carolina goes with a big dude here. Defensive tackle, Jaden Crumdy, however you want to pronounce it. I am not great with names. I apologize. Mississippi State. This place, this school holds a little place in our heart with, interviewing Charles Cross, his coach, a couple of years ago. But Carolina, there's been talk, they don't have that true nose in that middle. They obviously have the guy who's escaping me from New Orleans. His name always is escaping me. Yeah, Shy Tuttle, which I know they really like, it sounds like. But this is a guy I think who'll just be, he'll be a rotational piece. This is a 6th-round pick. He's probably not, starter material, more of a rotational guy to slide in on certain, groupings and pairings on that defense. But yeah, I think you always need to add depth in some of those areas. I'll be honest with you, Bryson. I'm shocked they didn't go edge rusher at all in this draft. Clearly, they're kind of punting on that until next season. But they did, add someone on that D-line. So what'd you think of Crumdy?
Yeah, I think shout out to Kevin in our episode last week. I think this was the guy that he brought up towards the end, the 6th or 7th round.
It was.
as a potential for Carolina. He's the closest thing to a nose tackle that they have. I was looking at his physical traits. Big dude, really big dude. 6'4", 300 pounds. He's going to take up space if nothing else. So, again, it's a 6th-round pick. You don't expect a lot from him, especially early on. But, you drafted in an area where you were really lacking in a true nose tackle. And I think that the worst thing that could happen is obviously, he's a practice squad player, not on the team. But I think he can be a contributor just based off of his size in that position if need be.
Yeah, let's talk about the 7th-round pick. Again, I don't know a ton about these back end guys, but Carolina went defense again with those last couple rounds. Linebacker from Michigan, Michael Barrett. I mean, was on obviously the national championship team. Made a decent amount of tackles for the Wolverines. And I feel like, this is a special teams role filler with this pick. And hopefully he can add some value there and then maybe get some plays in here or there on, some of the game reps. So I think there's special teams value with a lot of these late round guys. And, with this kickoff changing, I think you're going to see, obviously guys that can hold up blocks, but you also people that can, fly around. And because I don't know if you've seen these, it's basically the XFL kickoff. I mean, if those guys find a hole, they're pretty much gone most of the time. Like they're off to the races because everyone's just so close together. So I think this guy will add some value for special teams, hopefully right off the jump. But I mean, I never hate adding a guy from a Harbaugh defense in college football. So I don't hate the pick. Again, at this point, it's throwing darts at a dartboard and hoping you hit the bullseye. So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is another guy that was a team captain for the national championship team at Michigan. He set a school record with 64 games played. He led the team with 3 forced fumbles. I think Jim Harbaugh has one of his helmets in a storage cabinet at his house that Michael Barrett cracked for making a tackle. He plays with a chip on his shoulder. I think the reason he slipped to the 7th round, he was projected to go in the 7th round. He's a smaller guy, right? He's 5'11", like 230. He's just a smaller guy for an NFL linebacker, but he plays with that chip on his shoulder. I think that he even said that during his interview after the draft. So a 7th-round pick, like you said, you're taking a flyer on somebody who has pedigree as a captain of a national championship team, who has some upside to him. Get into the NFL on an NFL regiment and see if, he puts on more weight or, maybe loses weight and gets faster. I don't know. But I think that he continues to add depth in a position group that needs it. And I think Barrett, like you said, is going to be a really good special teamer. And I think potentially a good linebacker for this team. I like Michael Barrett more than I like Trevin Wallace at this point. And that's just me. I understand Trevin Wallace has all the the intangibles of the height and the speed, but I like this build of a linebacker when it comes to someone playing with a chip on their shoulder, someone who comes from that pedigree, someone who led their team in tackles. He received the team's top linebacker award at Michigan. I just think that he has high upside and he played well while he was at Michigan. You didn't see Trevin Wallace playing well throughout his time at Kentucky. He had spurts, but I think Wallace is more of the let's see what coaching can do with him, and Barrett is more of a let's see if he can make it in the NFL with his size. So again, Barrett's probably not the fastest or tallest or strongest linebacker on the field, but he plays with his heart on his sleeve, and I think he's going to add attitude to that defense similar to what Smith Wade will.
Yeah, and shout out to Kevin, because Kevin was tweeting today asking, Big Ten and Michigan fans about him and what kind of player the Panthers are getting. And Michael Barrett's dad actually replied to his tweet. I don't know if you saw this. He said he's humble with a heart of a lion, thrives in an underdog role, give him a chance. So that's what we're looking at out of this guy. Again, I think he's got a role on special teams. We'll see how that things shake out. Bryson, before we get to our comparison of our mock draft, biggest holes you feel like were not filled in this draft?
Yeah, I think I tweeted it after. I didn't see Carolina not drafting in these two areas, and that's edge, like you mentioned, and center. We talked about it for weeks leading up to the draft, the uncertainty of Corbett there. It sounds like they're cross-training Christensen to be the backup, Brady Christensen at center. Two guys that haven't played center in the NFL. That's taking a risk, right? Two guys that have significant injury history, taking a risk. I thought that they would draft someone, whether it be early or even later, like a Bortolini, to kind of be the protege to the center position and fill in if needed. But them not addressing that is a little bit concerning, especially if, unfortunately, the players don't stay healthy at that position. And then obviously edge, we know that there is a lack there. Two guys starting that have injury histories themselves, in Clowney and Wonnum. You still have Wormley, who's a free agent that was with Carolina last year, and Henry Anderson. So maybe they bring those two guys back. But this team is I feel like this team's gonna struggle to rush the quarterback. Derek Brown isn't really a pass rushing defensive tackle. Maybe that changes with adding A'Shawn Robinson beside of him. But Wonnum, we've talked about, this is going to be his real chance to be a starting edge defender with a full-time pass rush role as an important player on the defense. And then Clowney, who's getting older, is coming off one of his best seasons, but he's getting older, and we don't know what we're getting out of him. So them not addressing edge was concerning as well for me.
Yeah, I think center is my biggest fear for this team. And I posed a question, I think during the draft, who is the backup to Corbett? And it ended up getting asked later on in a press conference, I think at one of the draft press conferences with Morgan. And I agree with you. You're taking a guy who played guard his entire career in the NFL, has had back-to-back serious injuries, is now going to center. And then your backup to that is a guy who's played left tackle and guard in the NFL his entire career and is also coming off of 2 injuries and is now starting to take snaps at center. That doesn't sound like a very good plan to me. So we'll see how it shakes out, and we'll see if we're talking about that position by week, 6, 7, and 8. But that one is my biggest concern. And I do think the center position is pivotal for a younger quarterback. I mean, they do a lot at the line of scrimmage. So I hope that works out, and I hope Corbett stays healthy and, everything shakes out well at that position. And I do like Corbett. I do like Corbett, and I do like Christensen. Both of us, I feel like both of us on this show have been kind of in his corner when he's been the starter at, any of the positions he was at. So I just think the inexperience there scares me a little bit. And then I agree, edge. I thought they would have went edge at some point in this draft earlier on because I thought there were some guys out there they could have went after. And then I would say corner too, because if Gilmore does not, he doesn't sign with this team, I do think there's a hole to fill there. The thing with him though is with both of those defense positions, I have faith in the coaching staff on the defense side of the ball to make things right. But I do think there is, a need there. And you got Wonnum coming off injury. And like you said, Clowney, who played in a star-studded defense last year with a really good coaching staff, who was awarded a head coach job this past season. So we'll see if Clowney stays into form there. But yeah, I would agree. I think those probably are the 3 for me. I know we kind of overlap there, but I think that's the most glaring coming out of this draft. But let's look at our mock draft here quickly that we had up. And this was the one we did with the first time around. So we did have Edgar come on later, and we did a quicker one. This was the more serious one where we took time. So obviously you can see we took Leggett, which we all thought, I thought across the board that he was going to be the pick. We all were high on Cooper. That didn't pan out. He went a pick before Jonathan Brooks, but Carolina actually moved up to after the Packers to go and get Brooks because Dallas was picking a few picks later, and we all saw the video of Jerry Jones, who was salivating over Brooks in his press conference, which for the night before your pick, I don't know why the hell you're saying that. I don't know if that was a smokescreen for someone to move up, but I don't know. Just the guy doesn't. That's the type of shit you don't want from your owner. So we obviously, again, we kind of followed, most of the picks from what Carolina did, and they went tight end. We took a tight end. Obviously, they didn't get Senate. And then we went Jalen right at running back later, but they obviously got Brooks early on. I do think Bortolini should have been the pick at 101. I'll stand by that. And I did think they would went after Brandon Rice, and they didn't. And he ended up going to L.A. With the Chargers. So, but yeah, overall, I mean, I think last year we did better, or we picked the guys we thought they were going to take. I think we had Zavala. I'm trying to think. We obviously had Bryce Young. I don't think we had Mingo. But I thought our mock drafts aligned pretty fair across the board from last year. This one, not so much, but I think we did hit some of the position groups, and we'll see kind of how things shake out. Bryson, I kind of talked about a little bit. Was there one guy in the draft when Carolina was up that you were hoping they were going to get that they just didn't draft in any of the rounds?
I mean, when Troy Franklin was slipping, I was like, okay, we need to really consider him as, we thought that was a guy that had a possibility going in the first, slipped to the second, and then he kept slipping and slipping. That opening day 4 or day 3, 4th round pick, I wanted Sanders, but Franklin was there as well. And I was like, man, adding Franklin with like Leggett, to that wide receiver room, I think improves it significantly. So I wasn't going to be upset if they decided to go that route. I was just so surprised to see him on the board there. And then, like you say, he goes to pick right after, following his quarterback to Denver. So I really liked Rice too. And Rice was slipping into the later rounds. I thought that, they brought him in for a 30 visit and that he could have been another addition to the wide receiver room. But I mean, at this point, the wide receiver room is getting pretty crowded. It might not be the deepest or the most talented, but, there's a couple of guys that are going to be on the outside looking in, and I don't know if it's going to be Terrace Marshall or who, but, it's a young group, except for Adam Thielen. It's a young group. I think that they are talented on the top end of that group. I am not giving up on Mingo. I can't understand the sentiment of people doing that already. I think we give Bryce Young some leeway for what of the terrible system he was in last year and the mistakes that he made, which I completely agree with. I think we need to do the same thing with Mingo. He was with the same coaching staff. He was put in a position, forced to play in a position that he's not comfortable with. Wasn't a natural fit for him, and I think he still showed improvement throughout the year towards the end. And I think Mingo is going to be a good receiver. I really do, and I'm not even close to wanting to move on from Mingo at this point. So I think people need to show that same forgiveness for Mingo that they show for Bryce. But yeah, I think Brennan Rice and Franklin, when they were on the board, I was heavily considering taking either of those guys.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the 3rd round. I think that is probably the one where I thought they could have went a DC Isaac. He was out there. He went to Baltimore later in the round. I really liked Jonah Ellis. I thought that guy had some good potential. He went 4 picks later to Denver. And honestly, whether you like this guy or not, and I think he slipped because of his medicals, I would have taken Peyton Wilson over Trevin Wallace. That's just me. I think he's a better player from what I've seen in the games I've watched. So, again, those were the couple of guys. And Brendan Rice was another one I thought, Carolina could have went. after in the later rounds. But, you know, I think they were pretty much set in that wide receiver room, it sounded like, from how they went in those later rounds. But let's look at the guys they brought in, the undrafted free agents. This list is always interesting. I remember last year when we talked about this, I think the guy for us that most people were talking about was the guy from App State, Peoples. You remember him? Cameron Peoples, I think was his first name. I thought maybe he had a shot in there. I'm trying to think who else they had in there. But this is the list they brought in. Two guys I wanted to just discuss, Bryson, that jumped off the page for me. I haven't looked at most of these guys, but I kept seeing a lot of chatter about Jalen Coker, and I'm like, all right, I need to see what this guy's about, because Steve Smith talked very highly of him, said he was, you know, one of the better route runners in this draft, and wasn't drafted. I mean, a guy came from Holy Cross, smaller school, but I watched some of his stuff. You know, he's a bigger target. He is a damn good route runner. From, you know, the stuff I've seen him on the couple of games I watched yesterday, and is not afraid to block, has put up some good blocks. I actually tweeted out a couple of some of the highlights I saw of him in the games I was watching, and his mom actually like replied and retweeted some of the stuff and was talking to me and Edgar today on Twitter about it. So, which is cool. I always think that's cool when parents are reaching out, but, yeah, I mean, I think this guy's a flyer. I'm not going to say this guy's going to, you know, crack the, you know, be a starter and, you know, start showing out, but I do think he's got a shot to make the roster. And if not, you know, the practice squad, and a guy that you could, you know, call upon, and, you know, I think he can make some plays. So he's exciting to watch. And then we got to talk about the kicker. This is, well, I guess I'll go to you. Any guys on this list? I was going to mention the kicker because I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Coker is an interesting prospect. You know, he set the school record at Holy Cross with 31 touchdowns and 2,715 receiving yards, and was a first-team Associated Press FCS All-American. You know, obviously playing at a smaller school. Lance Zierlein had him projected as a 5th or 6th round pick. So I think to get him as one of the higher-paid undrafted free agents, bringing him in as that taller receiver, I think he's 6'1". He's got potential. He does. I remember last year, I think it was last year, was Rajon Wright that we were high on, the corner. It might have been last year or a year before. I thought that he had a chance to make the roster, but ended up not. But I think Coker, again, it is a crowded wide receiver room like we talked about. I don't know if I'm done with Terrace Marshall. I know you are, but
turn the page, baby.
The flashes that he showed at the end of 2 years ago, I think there's still a little bit there. But you bring in a guy like Coker, who just is that's probably going to outperform him in training camp. Let's be honest here. It's going to be hard for a guy like Terrace Marshall to make the roster with a coaching staff and front office that doesn't care he was a 2nd round pick. So. Exciting prospect. And then, yeah, the kicker, I'll let you go ahead with the kicker. I like that undrafted free agent signing as well.
Yeah, Harrison Mevis. I mean, the guy made a 61-yarder in college. He is massive. He reminds me of the Badgers kicker a couple years ago, the Italian guy, and I can't remember his name, but the guy was he's just a big-ass dude. He was almost like a freaking linebacker out there kicking, making field goals. He reminds me a lot of him. The guy is huge. He's a big-ass dude. He's obviously got the leg. It's just, can he be consistent with it? Because we know, I mean, Eddie Pinheiro ain't kicking a 60-yard field goal. He's more of the accurate type kicker, barring, let's not forget about the Atlanta Falcons game a couple of years ago when he missed that, you know, chip shot extra point and then he missed it again in overtime. But yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it puts some fire to Eddie, you know, who hasn't showed up for the voluntary portion of this first, you know, round of practices with this new staff. So I think that's kind of interesting. And I think this is just them, you know, hey, Eddie, we're not going to fuck around here. We're going to bring in someone and, you know, put feet to the fire and see what you can do with it. So competition, I think, brings out the best in everyone. I don't hate this. They actually signed this guy, this Harrison guy from Missouri, to a multi-year deal, which I thought was interesting too. So one to watch. This I didn't know we were going to have a training camp, kicker competition, and let's see how things play out. But here we are. I mean, let's see what happens with it. But going back to Coker for a bit, Steve Smith had him in his top 20 wide receivers in the draft. And I know Steve Smith has had some players that people have, disagreed with at that position. But this is the list 18 to 20. Ricky's guy, Jalen Polk at 18. 19, Jalen Coker. And 20, Roman Wilson. So pretty good company to be in coming from an undrafted guy. Again, we'll see what happens. I'm pulling for him. I hope this guy makes the team and has an impact for them. And I'm just excited. I like to see some of these, guys. I mean, look at Adam Thielen. The guy was a walk-on really to a team, and, he showed out, and look at the career he had. So he was an undrafted free agent. And, he made his mark in the NFL and has had a really successful career. So I'm pulling for Coker, and I really hope he makes the team. And I'm curious to see what about this kicker, man. I didn't look at any of these other guys. I don't know if any other guys pop out to you at all from this list, but I'm all for it. I mean, if this guy's bombing 60-yarders and can be pretty accurate, I'll take him.
Yeah, the only other note I wanted to add about him is his nickname is the Thicker Kicker, and it's thick with 2 C's. So he's a big boy. Hey, maybe that is a plus on special teams. He can kind of lay some wood out there tackling. So, yeah, I think it's a good thing to bring competition for Eddie. Eddie had his struggles last year. Eddie's had his struggles throughout his career in Carolina, on and off. But I think Eddie's been more good than bad while he's in Carolina. But, the obvious area where he struggles is those, 50, 60-yard kicks. And, not having that ability is really it brings you a peg down when you're out there on the field and that your kicker can't do that. So bringing in Harrison Mavis to compete and see what happens. I don't think he missed a PAT while he was in college, which is impressive. And, he had some struggles, I think, in his second year, but I think his career made percentage was 80%. I think Harrison, the kicker they drafted that's with the Chiefs now, what's his last name?
Butker.
Harrison Butker's was like 70% in college. So I think that doesn't really tell the whole story, and we'll see what happens when he gets out there in training camp. I think he has a chance to be the kicker because, again, you mentioned they signed him to a multi-year deal, which is very interesting. I'm sure they had some competition for other teams trying to bring him in for training camp, so maybe that was the deciding factor for him. But I think this is a guy that they're going to give a legitimate chance to win the job to.
Yeah, and just looking at some of his stats, he was 24 of 30 on field goals this past year, which is, you'd like to see that a little bit better. He was between 39 and up. He missed 1 kick, and then beyond 40 is kind of where things got a little shaky. He was 2 for 5 from 40 to 49, and then 3 for 5 and 50 plus. He obviously hit the 61-yarder this year, but the guy was ice in his veins when it came to extra points. I think he missed 1 according to ESPN this past year, but otherwise never missed 1. But he's 243 pounds. He is a big dude.
Yeah, he is.
Very big dude. But I think it's known across the league, you're only as good as your next kick, it seems like, for that position. And I think a big thing for kickers is your confidence. So we'll see what this guy's got in that department, and we'll see, really how things shake out. We just want to thank everyone for tuning in to the Panthers on Tap podcast. You can catch our episodes wherever you get your podcast. Go give us a follow on Twitter for all your analysis and breaking news. Hit us up on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. We're really close to 500. Once we get it there, it's a free Panthers custom jersey. So, again, we're a couple subscribers away. Hit that button. We appreciate all the support on all of our platforms. And as always,